Welcome back, friends, and today I'm reading an original novel, Piggy, Traitor by Terrance Crawford, Book 5, Chapter 2, Part 2. Sounds good to me, Terry said, swinging his muffler over his shoulder and adjusting his cap. Foley's eyes darted back and forth between the splitting camps before he resigned himself with a sigh, tugging his fork into his waistband, beginning to gather his things. Like the rest of them, he had nothing to lose and a safe place to gain. "Oh yeah, that's fine," Danny cried. "You all just leave me and Rita here. More space for us anyway, right, Rita?" Rita, seemingly discreet. "Either one of us attacks the lesser, or one of those things managed to get inside," she reasoned, her voice flat and dull. "I don't know which would be worse." Rita trudged forlornly into the next room, returning with a packed bag. The other followed suit, each cautiously retreating to their respective quarters and returning with knapsacks, backpacks, and fanny packs and bags. It was a strange feeling seeing someone's entire person reduced to luggage, so it was decided their next destination, the safe place. By the time the group had said their goodbyes to the gallery, night had fallen over the island without the constant, dull overhead glow of the city streets. The street lighting. Dales could fully take in the dozens of stars that sparkled overhead, illuminating their way. Of course, he would have perfected for his favorite star, the sun, to light the sky, but he had now voted on that particular measure. It was only he and Danny who were comfortable spending the night in the gallery after the attack. He did not begrudge the others in their need for hasty retreat, but if he were being honest, he had been looking forward to a good night's sleep. He would not find one tonight. The group of six trudged on mostly in silence. There was a few phrases muttered throughout the evening. "Watch your step. Oh, I think it's this way." But there was mainly spoken as asides, and rarely to anyone in particular. It was going to be a long voyage for all of them if anyone was going to be from the rear with Danny led from the front. Arguably the best spot from which to lead. The safe places, if it existed at all, was going to be a trek from Evalia Art Gallery. If the rumors were to be believed, the safe place lay on the opposite side of the massive railway that ran through the island. It was a couple days' walk at best, maybe less if they decided to risk taking the metro system. Even with the best of luck, they would have an arduous journey ahead of them, and Diego had never had the best of luck. Fog rolled in over the hills, a ghostly white mist that enveloped the group, swarming them up to their knees. No one ever really talked about the fog, weightless wisps of white that seemed to blanket the island, and had rolled in the same time as the virus. Just another reason to wait until daytime, when the fog had turned morning dew, but time was of the essence, as it was these days. So they marched. The moon overhead pierced through the veil of the fog, casting a light over dim light over their path. Its position in the sky was the only way to tell the passage of time. At night, she liked receiving a thing of the past. Each one of them they passed either flickered in a state of despair or had been left to the elements for so long it was no longer working at all. The group had been walking nonstop for hours, fearing that if they stopped to set up camp for the evening, they would be beset by the creatures. They were correct. It was a gleaming ray in the distance that first alerted them. Terry was quickly to call out of as soon as he saw it, maybe to make up for his perceived lack of action back at the grocery store. The group increased their speed, picking up their steps impeccably, hoping not to alert the creatures to their presence. It worked for a little while too. The sextet was covered in a fair amount of grow round unnoticed until crunch, the snapping of a twig underfoot. A gasp of breath hitched in Rita's chest at the small tree branch cracked in half under her weight. Glowing eyes snapped into focus, searching the night, and landing immediately on Rita. Those eyes blinked in the distance, fluttering to life that way the eyes often did after a long slumber. The sound of laboring breaths grew louder, and a smell like old food and burning hair began to blow down the hill. Derek took off instantly. If he had to choose between the options of fight or flight, he would always choose flight. Fighting was dangerous and fleeing was not. It seemed like an easy choice. Diego credited his survival to his ability to choose his battles. His less that he had to use his shovel, the happier that he was. He picked up his knees as he ran, taking in every piece of advice that he had ignored from gym teachers over the years. High knees, pump your arms, Alvarez, you look like a department store mannequin. You had better engage that core out there, young man, and you better like it. They were experts on the subject after all. Lucy followed suit, picking up speed as she took big bounding leaps away from their pursuers. She was poised to overtake even Diego with her springy steps. Quickly catching up with him, it was then that Diego made the mistake of looking back. He only managed to spot two of the creatures in the distance, which meant he had miscounted by an order of magnitude. Looking back up the hill that he had just descended, Diego saw not two of the creatures, but 24 of them, each ambling down the hill in the distance, their eyes lit up like the fireflies dancing in darkness, each with a haunting crimson orb that seemed to illuminate another ahead of it. Though the creatures were usually sluggish and slow, something about a fresh meal motivated them, and they descended upon the group like flies on a slab of old meat. The infected weaved around Danny, swarming like their weight onto Terry, and to be fair, seemed to as though he'd be a much more delectable meal. He fended them off commendably, wielding his trusty muffler with all the ferocity that he could muster. It was working too. The creatures that were unwise enough to step into the midst were getting so thoroughly clever that the others were beginning to weave around him as well. He was not hard pressed to admit that the sound of aluminum crashing against the monster's head was as satisfying a sound as he had ever heard. Even with Terry's muffler dating the bolts of the beasts, they continued to come spilling forward from the night like bats from a cave. The creatures seethed and surged, running the group as they fled, no longer in search of anything but the nearest shelter. It was almost impossible for the crew to hear one another over the frenzied grunting of the creatures, each one of them drawling out loud as the prospect of a warm meal. Impossibly, a voice managed to cut through the chatter. Look, look up ahead, Lucy managed to choke out, trying to keep her head above the half-dozen creatures trying to pull her under. She pointed with an extended arm, and Diego's gaze followed her finger. Lucy was right. There was building up ahead, the old Lucilia Mall. Foley scoffed loudly at her suggestion, and Diego could help but agree with the fox. There was no chance that the infected had not already managed to infiltrate and take over the mall by now. The building itself was run down and held together with plywood and prayers, and that was just from the outside. Still, it was better than their current situation, but by magnitudes. A cry cut through the night, instantly recognizable. Rita, Terry shouted. Everyone stopped to look around for the smallest member of their group until, a muffled cry for help from beneath a literal log pile of creatures. Rita had been pushed under by the ranks of the infected, and a half-dozen of them pulled her in every direction as they tried to make off with their new meal. Terry would have none of it. Dozens of the creatures bounced off Terry's massive chest as he turned back. A lone blockade in the coursing river of the creatures, swatting the things out of his way as if they were uninvited insects at a family picnic. Terry reached into the wreathing mass of creatures and plucked Rita from the center, slinging her over his shoulder. Dale's eyes went wide in astonishment, but there was no time to be impressed. Fewer and fewer of the things were keeping up with them, but that only left the sextet to deal with the ones currently besieging them on every side. Danny delivered a powerful kick with his hind legs ringing the bell around the creatures. He seemed to be doing what he could, especially considering that none of the creatures seemed to be thinking him worth a meal. The creatures' numbers were trailing off now. Some had come to reason that the chase would not be worth it if they had to split their bounty between such numbers, while others had gone for a prize only to be rebutted by a strike to the head. Between Terry and Diego, any of the creatures that came too close to the group met the same fate. Still, they were outnumbered, overwhelmed, and outmatched. The infected creatures did not know what it to be exhausted. They did not know how to be no shame. They followed no social norms or customs. The infected were a mass snapping, jowls, and sniping claws, and and everyone in the group was doing their best to keep away from them. Whap! Dio struck one of the creatures with the head of his shovel, the stunned monster falling back as the group of 6 moved down the hill. Swarm creatures parted just enough to allow their fallen member to pass through them and then closed ranks. "You don't have a weapon?" Dio shouted over the righteous din of creatures stabbing at their heels. "The pen is mightier than the sword, you know," Lucy cried back. She was wrong, however. In a combat situation, a sword was definitely mightier than a pen, and in this situation, she had neither. As the crowd of infected began to surge around them, Dale climbed on top of the floor, and creatures doing his best to keep them at bay. For every beast that he managed to temper with a shovel, another seemed to appear in its place. A hydra of hungry hogs nipped at his heels. Foley bounded forward from the mall at the breakneck speed, practically bouncing off the boarded up windows. He pounded on the door, furiously hoping that was a solution. It was not. Gale pulled him off the boarded up building immediately on the island of Avalia. Sometimes things like this were designed to keep things out. Sometimes they were designed to keep things in. Finally, the rest of the group reached the door of the mall. They had long since been boarded shut through weather. For the mall's protection or for the public still remained to be seen. Foley's furious pounding had done nothing. It had bound the group for a head start in futility. Then arrived after Diego, unburdened by the chase of the creatures. With Lucy's arrival, the board began to give. Each strike of Diego's shovel seemed to chisel away at the plywood until it began to splinter and break. Once again, it was Terry who turned the tides of the battle. His massive frame crashed through the boarded-up front door of the Lucelia Mall, his friend spilling through the tiger-shaped hole that had been caused by an unimpeded speed. The sound of twisting metal and splintered wood echoed in the night as Terry and Rita burst through the door, fully weaseling his way in right after. Lucy slipped through the crater that they had created. Dale ushered Danny through the door before helping himself inside. The creatures crashed against the front door of the mall, held at bay by the splintered piece of plywood that the group shoved back against the doors. With all their might, even one of them altered, it would mean certain doom for all of them. With Rita unconscious, their numbers were already down. The monsters continued to throw themselves at the door. If one of them made it through, they all did. Still, the quintet held fast, and after what felt like hours, the rattling stopped. Lucy watched through the glass as the creatures seemed to disperse, one by one, as if they had suddenly remembered an appointment or had discovered they had somewhere more important to be. Diego and his newfound company continued to hold fast in case that some sort of trick. But as the sun started to creep over the hills, they began to relax as much as one of them was when hiding from the infected. And that's the end of chapter 2. So, friends, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow us on social media, Funkyplaybrothers, and please remember to subscribe to our YouTube. Thanks for watching. Bye.